Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this really exciting day, this launch event for JVP-Milwaukee. I've been talking to Rachel and to Ellen, a few other people for a while now, and I knew they were very determined to make this happen, and it's very exciting to see it start. And this is a really amazing time for them to have become a chapter. Let me tell you a little bit about JVP. And I've been involved with them since 2006, and I've been involved in a very deep way. I've been on the board several terms. I was part of a major restructuring committee, and I'm currently involved in several national working groups. I'm on the phone with JVP national people or other people in other chapters all the time. And so you'll understand why I generally talk about JVP as we. I mean, it's a very interactive organization, and I think that's part of its success. So, as you know, the launching of this chapter is not an isolated instance, but actually part of a huge trend, a rising trend, I think, of people who want to change the equation for Palestinians. And in fact, JVP is the fastest growing national Jewish organization in the United States, and possibly anywhere. And this past summer, JVP was the only major Jewish organization to unequivocally oppose the assault on Gaza. And the reaction was we went from 40 chapters to 72, including Milwaukee, and there are more in development, probably about another 20 or 30 in development. And existing chapters like JVP Chicago brought on new members. 60,000 people joined JVP's online supporters, bringing the total list up to over 200,000 people. We are also winning the battle of public opinion in social media, which may seem simple, but I think it's significant. I mean, not simple, but silly. For example, on Facebook, we went from 57,000 likes to 197,000 over this summer. APAC has 90,000. J Street has 25,000. JVP's YouTube views, just in July, 1.3 million views and 21,000 likes. APAC, 1 million views and 725 likes. J Street, 204,000 views, 1,300 likes. And I share those numbers to point out again that we are at the leading edge of a trend to question US policies on Israel, a trend to step out of the shadows and be seen and heard. And it seems that Jewish activists, seasoned or new, are responding to our core message. And that is a call for freedom, for justice, and equality. We focus on human rights, on civil rights, on people, not on rigid solutions. The way we understand the extraordinary growth this summer is that people desperately needed a place to rage, to grieve, to be on the streets, and to voice their opposition to Israeli actions, and yet still be part of a Jewish community. All around the country, JVP groups filled the streets, spoke to elected officials, called out corporate complicity, and challenged Jewish leaders who support occupation, siege, and massacre in our names. And staying silent is the same to me as supporting occupation, siege, and massacre in our names. Over the last year, about a year, JVP chapters and activists held more than 1,000 educational events and public actions, raising the debate about US support for Israeli policies in churches, synagogues, a few, schools, government venues, and in the media. Last June, dozens of JVP members and staff went to Detroit to help the Presbyterian Church USA make the decision to divest $21 million from Caterpillar, Motorola Solutions, and Hewlett-Packard, all companies that enable and profit from the occupation. Last summer, during the assault on Gaza, JVP mobilized members and supporters to respond immediately with street demonstrations and civil disobedience actions in dozens of cities. JVP JVP created online petitions, lobbying letters, and participatory social media projects. And while this summer's protests necessarily focused on the massacre in Gaza, many also addressed underlying fundamental issues: the siege of Gaza, the occupation, the ongoing Nakba, and the Palestinian right of return. In sum, the systemic inequality that is the root cause of the situation Palestinians face. We recognize that these issues must be in the forefront as part of the longer-term sustained organizing work as partners in the broader movement for justice. We are anti-racist in all its forms, and that is an active part of our work, which brings up something very important, and that's the connections between struggles and the ability of JVP to be in solidarity with Palestinians, with Black and Brown Americans, with LGBTQ communities, with struggling people everywhere. Because we work within a universal human rights framework, JVP activists can genuinely be in solidarity with Ferguson, Missouri, and Brooklyn, New York, in the wake of the miscarriage of justice in the murders of Michael Brown and Eric Garner. It's all connected. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank were giving tips on dealing with tear gas to the Ferguson protesters. And there were signs reading from Palestine to Ferguson, both in Missouri and in the West Bank. And just this morning, I saw a sign in the West Bank that said, "We can't breathe." And that's true there too. It's all connected, and so we must be too. Ferguson and other U.S. city police forces get trained in Israel using military-grade weaponry. Israel gets a war bonus by field testing its weapons and security systems on Palestinians, and then it sells these weapons and systems to other countries. The U.S. gives $3 billion of military aid to Israel yearly, all of which must be spent on U.S.-made weapons. And then surplus U.S. military vehicles and weapons wind up in municipal police forces around the U.S. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish between Israel and the U.S. Take the case of Palestinian-American Razmia Odeh, a beloved Chicago area woman who works with hundreds of Arab women, mostly new immigrants, helping them adjust to life in the U.S. She was arrested and convicted in a Detroit court under an absurd charge of vicious prosecution and a decidedly stacked deck. And JVP is actively involved in fighting for justice for Razmia Odeh, who is now being held in solitary confinement in a county jail in Port Huron, Michigan. The campaign against her seems to have been orchestrated by Israel's supporters, if not Israel itself. It's helpful to remember that quote by Mahatma Gandhi: "First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win." And I've been involved long enough to say that I remember the ridicule stage. I don't think we're there anymore. I think we're in the fight-you stage. And the fight is happening on many fronts. Another place the fight is happening is in the academic arena, which I'm sure most of you know. From the firing of Professor Stephen Saleda at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, due to pressure from donors objecting to Saleda's tweets critical of Israel, to the AMCA blacklist of professors, which listed 218 professors that Jewish students and others should avoid because of their anti-Zionist views. To the measures in several state legislatures to punish universities who participate in a boycott of Israeli institutions. This is another front in the fight to squelch the expanding support for Palestinians and the ever-increasing criticism of Israel. In response to the challenges on academia and academics, JVP has recently formed an academic council on boycotts to be ready to assist in the fight. And last year, JVP activists joined coalitions working on state legislation in New York, Illinois, Florida, and Maryland. Despite all these challenges, all of these travesties of justice for Stephen Saleda, for Razmia Odeh, for Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Gaza this summer, and many more, of course, there is reason to be hopeful. People seem to be waking up, don't they? This is certainly true regarding support for Israel, and it's especially visible, as Grant said, among younger Jews. Last year's Jewish population survey, tallying views and practices of American Jews, showed a steady decline by age among those who regard themselves as very attached to Israel. 38% among Jews over age 65, and only 25% among Jews between 18 and 29. And this applies to the general public as well. Polls conducted by the Pew Research Center and Gallup in late July found that just 55% of those over 65 considered Israel's actions in Gaza to be justified. And between those aged 18 and 29, only 25% thought they were justified. And just yesterday, the Brookings poll of American attitudes on the conflict revealed that 1/3 of Americans, and this really shocked me actually, 1/3 of Americans want the U.S. to push for a one-state outcome in Israel-Palestine. And this was defined as a single democratic state in which Jews and Arabs are full and equal citizens, covering all of what is now Israel-Palestine. So that's, I think, a big change. Jewish communal institutions, even the most liberal of them, are out of sync with changing Jewish attitudes towards Israel. For example, Hillel International, which maintains Jewish student centers at thousands of colleges, rejects students and programming that have any connection to boycott and sanction. You can't even have a debate about BDS at Hillel. And this has brought about the very exciting Open Hillel movement, which challenges these measures to shut down discussion. The first Open Hillel conference, held at Harvard just a few months ago, drew hundreds of college students together to strategize, debate, and make plans to create open spaces for discussion on campuses. And the If Not Now, When movement grew out of frustration with J Street and major Jewish institutions such as the Jewish Federations when they failed to question the Israeli war on Gaza this summer or even to express any concern over the killing of Palestinians. This summer, small groups of mostly college students held prayer vigils and services of mourning outside of Israeli and Jewish institutions, reciting the Jewish mourners' Kaddish and reading the names of those who were killed. Clearly, questioning the status quo is an accelerating trend, and we see it all over. Politicians behind closed door, media, and in families. And in a lot of the families, it's the younger children, the younger generation, questioning, pushing their parents, coming back from college and really having those conversations with their parents. Politicians behind closed doors. I've had meetings where politicians say things you would never have heard them say before. The media, Jon Stewart, the feminist site Jezebel, all of these have been espousing views that are quite different than what it was just a few years ago. And this kind of change, this general public change, is really important. We need to change general perception before we can change policy, and that change is happening. And so Jewish Voice for Peace Milwaukee, well, you're here now, and you're going to change things in Milwaukee. So congratulations.